If I were to tell you that I was a certified catacombs enjoyer, I would doubtless be left with a lot of scrunched up faces and raised eyebrows. You enjoyed farming hours for alchemical extract? No, not at all. But once you look past the dragoon grind, the stuff that's actually there is great. Particularly some of the challenging bosses and, what else, the story. It is no secret that I consider the Catacombs to be the singular best piece of storytelling in the entire game. An ingeniously perverse premise, interesting world building, layered characters, and a mountain of tragedy, all somehow wrapped up in a dozen or so quests. It's praise I can extend to the side quests in the Catacombs too. One quest deals with a soldier reliving his regret for trying to burn down the forests of Ravenwood. Another deals with a tree minder selling himself out to the Dragon Spiral army. Another is simply someone who misses his pet spider.
My only regret is that I don't have you with me, even just an image to remind me.
After a detour in Dragonspire, where we take pictures of the spiders in the Crystal Grove, descendants of his long-lost pet, we return to give him the images. The quest completes with the soldier's knowledge crystal resetting, looping the recording of his existence, this time with only a single tiny change.
My only regret is that I don't have you with me. At least I have an image to remind me.
It's cinema, people. The point I'm making is that though this year is the designated between arcs off year for Wizard101, that really doesn't mean a whole lot except for a few less areas and a shorter runtime. Using these in-between years as an excuse to go back to previous worlds and flesh them out is a good compromise, letting the game expand on old ideas without having to deal with the somewhat deflating reality of an old area taking up the moniker of next major arc world. And the fact that this year's expansion is required means it can play the happy medium between side diversion and main story. If anything, these bridging expansions are a prime time to really swing for the fences. Unsurprisingly, Selenopolis is a rather experimental expansion for the game, in both form and function. Rather than the exclusive domain of the highest level players, zones in Selenopolis span across many different levels. Several times running through some of the areas, you'll encounter enemies about 15 ranks below where they should be, but that's only because they're part of a series of quests designed for players 120 levels below you. Some areas in Selenopolis are just completely optional. There's not a single mainline quest that will take you through the halls of Toiret, for example. Germane to the main story though, progression is non-linear. You can tackle the 3 major branches of the story in whatever order you'd like, and even within that there will still be some options. The Marketplace of Ideas branches further into 4 separate quests to attend the Bard's plays, which can also be tackled in any order. Of course, these things are not entirely experimental. In some sense, they're the oldest tricks in the book. The 3-street structure and the optional side areas are clearly reminiscent of what Wizard City in Arc 1 did with dungeons like Sunken City and Tomb of the Beguiler. But then, that was also 16 years ago, and it has never happened again in the meantime, so its reappearance is definitely noticeable. The bones of the place are one thing, but Selenopolis feels like the most fun the game has had with itself in quite some time. Instead of enemies behind closed doors, or roaming the corridors in plain sight, secret bosses are hidden in tiny little corners throughout the zones. A small hole in one of the doors inside the Grand Exposition leaves enough space for your pet to squeeze through. A rank 999 boss waits on the other side. A back entrance behind the final boss reveals another rank 999 boss atop the tallest pyramid of the Selenopolis. Though the halls of Toiret is made for lower leveled players, running to the end of the hall will reveal an open sigil without any quest prerequisite. A rank 999 boss, naturally. Instead of rigidly defined 1 to 3 battle sigil encounters, long-lost puzzles from the Krakatopia of old might break up the combat, sometimes requiring you to straight up leave the dungeon you're in to search for clues, or require you to understand basic color theory. Whoops.
Here, I'm sharing my screen.
Red, green, yellow, and then red, green, blue fires?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what we're trying to do. So yellow and green make what color, and that's what the fire should be.
It's called a cyan teleporter, though.
Okay, that's magenta, cyan, yellow, and then... But that's impossible. And cyan and magenta don't make... So wait, try changing one of the fires for me? We'll set all of them off real quick.
Wait, what the... Wait, what?
Red and green make yellow.
Oh, so the reason... Oh, okay, because 3 colors don't make anything.
Yeah.
I see.
Yay.
You're so good at color
I don't get
theory.
credit
Oh my
in your
god.
video. No,
Yes,
you
get credit.
have to.
I'm recording.
You have to
so
say it in the video.
Beyond just the hidden bosses, the required ones are more adventurous than ever before. A series of fights in the Tomb of the Forgotten sees one boss give you heal over times after every buff you place, and helpful blades after a few rounds. Another boss places an aura on everyone, converting all heals into damage. No big deal if you're not planning to heal. It's a strange set of mechanics, which either aren't very threatening or actively helpful. No wonder they can never beat the wizard. They should just choose to have better cheats next time. Things begin to make a lot more sense, however, when the two bosses finally team up. With that negative aura in place, those heal over times act as a slow drain on your health every time you buff. And those blades they keep giving you are now fodder for the death mobs to convert them into weaknesses. Getting to this boss was like falling into a trap you definitely should have seen coming. Other bosses are equally as intriguing. Riddle fights where you have to play the card that matches the school of the story the boss is narrating, a raw fight where you can't attack him unless you exactly mirror the conditions he sets up, or an Anubis fight where you must sacrifice a percentage of health to be able to do meaningful damage to him, and a series of solo battles where you summon the gods themselves to fight alongside you. We could spend a lot more time counting off all the neat ideas, but Selenopolis has, by my estimation, the best collection of boss fights in the game. The fun certainly isn't reserved to only the gameplay. Wizard101's comedy is largely, I think, underappreciated. This has been a consistently funny game for a very long time, but Selenopolis probably has the best hit ratio of good jokes since Caramel. From Duncan being the disruptive question asker during the Arcanum orientation, the bickering between the Lufulum and the shadow creatures, or the debate regarding the contents of the last canopic jar, you'd be hard-pressed not to at least snort. And the entirety of the marketplace of ideas is just hysterical, with its prickly and very egotistical stagehands. The highlight is definitely the back and forth fact check between the audio tour guide and the Covenant of Ra inside the Moonseum. Or maybe the highlight is the nearly 2 minutes unprompted speech about the rise of privately owned apothecaries in the city.
But ultimately, as they moved from privately owned apothecaries to properties shared amongst numerous manders, their finances could only be sustained through witchcraft. Well, that made things even more expensive because of all the witchcraft training sessions and cauldron import fees and just straight embezzlement.
All of which is to say that the experience of going through Selenopolis is enough to wholeheartedly recommend it. Here's a game that so many years later doesn't feel like it's struggling for good ideas. Ideally, some of Selenopolis' inventive spirit will carry over into future expansions. That being said, we shouldn't stop the conversation there. Selenopolis may be a good time, but as the bridge to the future of the game, its aims are a bit more ambitious than sheer amusement. Selenopolis has a universe to build. One of the major goals of the fourth arc, explicitly expressed as such, was to make the Spiral a more breathing, interconnected place, where characters and worlds would respond and interact with one another. Major changes in one place in time would no longer be limited to only that world or that expansion. It's an effort that's been slowly germinating throughout the years, most notable with the increase in recurring characters starting with the third arc. Now, you can't simply discard characters once a world is over. There's a very real possibility they may come back later, and that there may be consequences. Selenopolis couldn't be any more clear on doubling down with this particular goal. It is an expansion built entirely on the premise that the wizard's actions have ripple effects across the spiral. To that end, I was very pleased to see the former Cabal within the ranks of the Arcanum, appearing both in the intro as well as part of our spell quests. When Sybil discussed opening up the Arcanum to the Cabal in Wallaroo, it would have been easy for that to have never been followed up on. The Cabal was formally disbanded after all, and I seriously doubt the First World will be rearing up its head as a pertinent plot point again anytime soon. Seeing the Cabal slowly integrate with the Arcanum could prove to be an interesting little subplot over the next few years. I hope we see more of this. But observing our former adversaries ingratiate themselves is hardly the most obvious way in which Selenopolis shows us the effects to our cause. Seeing our former adversaries attack us in droves works pretty effectively too. Selenopolis runs through the laundry list of former baddies, Umbra Legion, Lufulum, the Tuts, ex-Nanas, all of whom want to exact their vengeance upon the wizard. The Selene makes the group's desire quite clear.
But now, those you have stepped on have crawled out from your footprint to topple you at last.
Part of the toppling includes kidnapping characters we've met from previous worlds. Even the title granted to the wizard this expansion, Earthborn, emphasizes a kind of conscious recall. It isn't about who we are, it's about how we got here. Now, in general, I'm fairly weary of fan service carousels like this, which often have a tendency to feel more like the reheated leftovers of a worn-out idea than an inspired usage of the game's history. However, I'm happy to report it was tastefully done here. Nobody feels out of character or overbearing. While I wouldn't call these appearances anything revelatory, neither returning villain nor hero crowds the spotlight enough to distract from the central story at hand. If anything, some of these inclusions are so perfunctory, one wonders why they were even included at all.
Greetings.
Saren, Ivan, Istar, and Ozzy are little more than interchangeable faces in need of rescuing. But as the story doesn't turn on these characters in any significant way, this really isn't a big issue. Although since we're on the subject, I do have to critique some of the choices here. 5 of the 8 characters being from Arc 3 is a little excessive, and Divum is clear, yet understandable favoritism. He already got his cameo back in Arc 4, not to mention we just saw Quartermain last year. I mean, sleeper hit, Greta is right there, guys. The ex-Nanas are literally one of the big factions against us. It makes sense. Selenopolis represents its interests of complicating cause and effect in more subtle ways. The Blended Grove is a location where magics are intertwined, and the connections, synergies, and discordances between them are thoroughly explored. Inside the Blended Grove, no school of magic can truly be understood in isolation. It is not the first time Wizard101 has done something like this. Previously in Novus, the introduction of the Archmastery system was paired with new spells that blended the schools of magic. But this blending was not only a new component of the gameplay, it was an alteration felt by the characters inhabiting the worlds as well. Archmastery emphasized Novus's newness, which the Cabal grabbed hold of as yet more evidence of the danger the Nothing posed. Broadly speaking then, Selenopolis seeks to continue where Arc 4 left off, and make a sort of blended grove out of the spiral, an open system in which the inputs, worlds, nations, peoples, are transformed both by combinations within and without those defined boundaries. It comes as little surprise then that an expansion such as Selenopolis would choose to spend its entire runtime dedicated to Khonsu, a Celestian who tabulates and catalogs all of the spiral's magical propensities and their interactions. In order to document the inner workings of the spiral, Khonsu makes a few fundamental assumptions about how the spiral operates. These assumptions tell us all we need to know about why he is the villain of the expansion. Under Khonsu, input and output can be clearly divined and predicted. Consequently, celestial bodies and their behavior can be easily manipulated, forming the basis of the astral schools of magic. Under Khonsu, the energies in the flow of the spiral can be precisely defined and measured. The spiral is a closed system, where the movements of the greater universe have absolutely no bearing, no reactions, no effects on the outputs it produces. Under Khonsu, the spiral exists in a contextless void, a discrete entity where actions have only minimal, easily quantified consequences. Indeed, the notion that this galaxy could be anything but a closed system is shocking to Khonsu, a possibility he failed to even consider before Mallory reveals the truth behind the Earthborn's arrival. This assumption doesn't manifest itself in words alone. Look no further than the petri dish that is Selenopolis to see Khonsu's beliefs in action. To properly study the full capacities of moon magic, Khonsu devised a plan to keep his little city running in perfect order, a perpetual motion machine of pliant followers. His astral experiments need subjects, and so every piece of Selenopolis is designed to maintain Khonsu's will. As such, every single character we meet native to Selenopolis is simply an extension of Khonsu, without exception. Each zone gives us new insight into how Khonsu maintains his authority. For the Luminaries, Khonsu's devout followers of the moon, it is a matter of propaganda. Characters repeatedly mention the close connection between moon and myth. In the marketplace of ideas, this connection becomes clear. In plays and theaters and libraries, we see the most flattering version of Selenopolis' ascendance. It was once a barren wasteland, until Khonsu liberated the poor Manders from the iron fist of the Tuts, revitalized the land with the help of powerful deities, and created a permanent, isolated settlement where no one would be enslaved again. In reality, the gods are chained to stone statues in the city center, unwilling servants to Khonsu's beck and whim. Upkeep of the marketplace's propaganda machine is minimal, the entire production funded and produced by the singular bard, seemingly the one avatar willing to join Khonsu's project voluntarily. Through the bard's magic, rewriting history becomes as easy as summoning a few dozen apparitions. With myth, Khonsu shapes the beliefs of his people. Khonsu then proceeds to shape the bodies of his people. In the Tomb of the Forgotten, we see the process through which manders are transformed into different species. Here, they are made into useful servants, his avatars. With the power of polymorphs, even the most emaciated of Mander, or really any unlucky creature who happens to walk by, can be made into the strongest of soldiers, able and willing to construct the most impressive structures, or become the most competent of war generals there ever was. With such unity in purpose, it is easy to see how a small community could have built a thing like Selenopolis. Of course, any massive project needs a sufficiently effective waste removal mechanism. Too many polymorphs on one body begins to take their toll, and the result eventually configures itself into a misshapen conglomerate of a creature. A pact with Anubis ensures these soul eaters are dealt with, considered a small payment for letting Khonsu build his city here. These polymorphs aren't only meant to build cities and experiment on, they're also good for more defensive measures, for espionage. Across the Selenopolis, we meet several ducks, seemingly minding their own business. Little is explained as to how they got here, or what they're after, but they seem cordial and helpful enough. They're not really ducks, though. Well, one of them is. Some are manders, unsurprisingly, others are giant bugs. All of them are avatars of Khonsu. But the most effective form of espionage at Khonsu's disposal are not ducks. They are the ones who think they know better. Chameleons known as the Covenant of Ra wander the streets and hallways of Selenopolis, defacing Khonsu's monuments and watching the Lunamary's movements. They think they're part of some burgeoning uprising. That too is a lie. The Covenant of Ra is merely controlled opposition. Manders polymorphed into chameleons to signify their induction into the cult. They're told they are invisible to the regular eye, but again, another lie. It is the eyes of Khonsu's Lunamaries which are wrong, morphed to make the members of the Covenant invisible. Thus, a self-regulating mechanism of surveillance. Rebellious thoughts can be funneled into a pre-existing, Khonsu-sponsored organization. Those who join said organization can then be easily identified and targeted should the need arise. Meanwhile, those who cannot see the Covenant are already loyal to Khonsu, and those that can see them, dubbed Light Seers, are known to be neither a part of Khonsu's supporters nor their opposition. They become the next target of indoctrination or destruction. What does it all add up to? It adds up to a perfectly predictable whole. Because Khonsu is the only will to exist inside Selenopolis, every outcome can be foreseen. There is no room for foreign interference, because that interference can be easily integrated and accounted for within the city's existing social structures. In the end, everything and everyone will be funneled to the correct place for the correct purpose, a set of simple, easily understood parts. Looking at Khonsu's creation, it may be tempting to say he views the spiral as a closed system, but hold on. A system, be it open or closed, can still be studied. Even if the outcome cannot be predicted with absolute certainty, a sophisticated enough model would be able to consider confounding variables. No, Khonsu's frustration with the Earthborn is the final piece in the puzzle. Not just an errant ripple in his laboratory, the Earthborn is a complete breach of containment. Khonsu flat out states that the spiral cannot be assessed under these conditions. Apparently, the Earthborn's mere presence is enough to break his entire research apparatus. In this way, Khonsu sees the spiral less as a system of causal sources, but more like a circuit. We see this idea play out most concretely in the Vivarium. Here, Khonsu writes up a somewhat passive-aggressive tale in which the wizard must be okay with accepting death. However, the real insight is in the specifics of the tale. The garden depicts an invariant cycle of order, where life is born, grown and cultivated, pruned, then born again. Life, death, rebirth, and death again. A closed circuit of continuous flow, with no resistance to speak of. But an open circuit is one in which current is prevented from moving due to a discontinuity somewhere along the circuit. And in Khonsu's formulation, the wizard is the most obvious discontinuity. Why does this distinction between system and circuit matter? Truthfully, it does not. No matter how we view it, the expansion clearly rejects Khonsu's understanding of the spiral. The idea that reality could be distilled into such easy mechanisms and simple orders is hardly borne out in practice, and the notion that an organism of this complexity cannot be assessed unless it is simplified so crudely can only be the belief of unchecked hubris or someone sorely lacking in creativity. It is doubtful Khonsu's experiments will be very fruitful in any way. That kind of thinking is beneath us now, beneath a game like Wizard101. After all, it is verifiably wrong to say the wizard alone turned over empires and altered societies at large. We certainly did not overthrow Nana or stop the spiral powers by ourselves. Mallory's final message may be cheesy, but it illustrates the point succinctly. No wizard or galaxy is an island. In the end, it's difficult to say anything too definitive about Selenopolis quite yet. Whether it ends up being more of an Arc 4 epilogue or Arc 5 prologue will become clear as Arc 5 begins in earnest. Certainly, Khonsu as a villain and his exploitation of the magics and peoples of Selenopolis very much typify him as the kind of villain we'd see in Arc 4. The manipulative and coercive society building best recalls Caramel and Lemuria, perhaps to their most successful degree yet. The witches were definitely not controlled opposition, and the old one would probably blush at the level of unity achieved in Selenopolis. Turns out Khonsu makes for a better Cabal leader than any of the Cabal leaders. Still, if I try to imagine what I'll remember most about Selenopolis in the future, I think it will most likely be its unorthodox structure. Ironically, despite all the discussion about the fourth arc being confusing, something I don't agree with, I would totally understand if someone said they were confused by the story in this expansion, and it's entirely because of the structure. Whereas the 3 streets in Wizard City were fairly disconnected little stories, the 3 zones in Selenopolis combine and interact in subtle ways. You kind of have to piece together the various elements of the setting yourself. Some of the Covenant of Ra steals records from quail inside the vivarium, claiming this garden is a monument to tyranny. Why? You won't be finding out in the vivarium. We get some details about the Covenant in the Tomb of the Forgotten, and the specifics of Toirette's involvement in revitalizing the land in the marketplace. What exactly is going on with the process of becoming an avatar we see in the marketplace? Again, you'll need to go consult the soul leaders in the tomb. And the whole deal with the Light Seers? Try a post-expansion side quest. And that's on top of the whole what exactly does Khonsu want from us question. None of this is a complaint, by the way, it is just a fairly novel way of building out the setting for the game, where typical worlds would explain key aspects of themselves on a need-to-know basis. Considering this is an expansion all about interconnectivity though, it makes all the more sense. Horizontal story structures like this do have their limitations. It lends to a decidedly uncompelling start and stop feeling. Because it must be assumed that any one zone will be the player's first zone, there's only so much you can do with the concepts at play besides introduce them. You can't, for example, carry over a character from one zone to the next, because the zones must be interchangeable. And nothing too pertinent can happen by the end of any zone, because any one zone must invariably end with a return to the status quo which kick-started the expansion. So really neat concepts like the Covenant of Ra end up getting less material than they deserve. It would be like Lemuria if Lemuria didn't have the Design Old One storyline acting as the connective tissue between the isolated sub-stories, which would make Lemuria a significantly worse expansion, as I'm sure you could imagine. In this case though, the shorter runtime and clever interconnectedness between zones mitigates the issue, as well as all 3 storylines being of generally high quality, whereas I thought Lemuria's vignettes were more hit and miss. So all in all, I think this structure was the right choice for a smaller bridge expansion like Selenopolis. What's next on the horizon for Wizard101? I can only think of one distinct possibility. The very first quest in the expansion offers us our first ever view of the Arcanum with the Sea's exterior, a hulking ship floating in space. I highly doubt that's a coincidence. There's an extremely strong possibility that Arc 5 eventually takes us to worlds outside the spiral. It would be quite incredible to show us a giant spaceship, only for it to never move anywhere. But where would it be moving to? We know for a fact there are now 2 Earthborn wandering about the spiral, but I'm not yet convinced Earth is the answer. There's another option. Khonsu mentions that part of his investigation into the spiral was meant to determine whether it is a resource to be plundered or a threat to be contained. A threat to what exactly? Khonsu re-emphasizes this after defeating him, noting that the spiral's power being able to extend beyond its borders could pose a threat to something. I think the most likely candidate is Khonsu's homeworld. Since we now know the Celestians don't originate from the spiral, it only raises the obvious question. Where did they come from exactly? And what about the spiral could possibly pose a threat? I can't say I'm not excited by the possibilities. With all of this talk of exterior influences, and understanding the spiral as a piece of a broader cosmos, I think it's about time we get to see that broader cosmos for ourselves.